Silent Hill, You May Never Leave Your Room, again, for PlayStation from Konami.
I can't decide if that's brilliant or just more marketing people smoking the same stuff the Sega Saturn guys were. Alright, so as we talked about earlier in the retrospective, one of the PlayStation's biggest contributions to the video game industry was that it really popularized survival horror games. This is primarily due to the fact that it was the first time that the ESRB was in place for the duration of a console generation, which really meant that developers could be just as scary, as violent, as gory, and disturbing as they wanted to be. Because, they now had the benefits of a rating board that was very clearly indicating to people, hey, this is something that only adults should play, and you know what? Adults play video games too, so yeah, it made sense to do that. So Resident Evil comes out, and of course was an enormous success, and after it came out, the horror genre just exploded. There were tons of horror games on the original PlayStation. There was Dino Crisis, Clock Tower, Parasite Eve. There were even some non-horror games that were emulating Resident Evil for one reason or another, like the Men in Black game and, Evil Dead Hail to the King. However, it seemed like no horror game could really compare to the Resident Evil series, which for the longest time was the gold standard. However, at Konami, they wanted to bring Capcom down a peg, so they put into production a horror game of their own. However, rather than giving it to an A team, they decided to hand it off to a group of problem employees who I guess they decided to keep on staff despite the fact that they didn't really integrate well into the company, primarily because at one point Kojima would have been considered a employee like that. They thought that maybe these guys could have had a use, so they got them all together and told them to make a Hollywood-style horror film. And then they just decided to do their own thing. And while Konami probably felt that they ordered chicken and got steak instead, they still released the game anyway, and I'm sure they're glad they did because the game, which would come to be known as Silent Hill, would go on to become one of the landmark games in the survival horror genre, and one of the only franchises to really give Resident Evil a run for its money within its genre. In Silent Hill, you take the role of a man by the name of Harry Townsend, who heads to Silent Hill with his daughter for a vacation, but after a car wreck, finds his daughter has disappeared into the mist and is headed towards Silent Hill alone. Harry gives chase and, finds that Silent Hill isn't really the vacation destination that he thought it was. He finds the town covered in a thick fog. After he enters, it seems like he can't go back the way he came, and most concerning of all, the place is full of all kinds of hellish and nightmarish creatures. Simply put, it is the last place in the world anyone wants to be stuck in. However, he knows his daughter is somewhere in the town, so he ventures deeper in order to find her and hopefully escape. So, one of the things that Team Silent wanted to do differently compared to other survival horror games at the time was that they wanted to make a more psychological horror experience. So, whereas something like Resident Evil is more visceral in that, it's more about the disturbing threats that are coming at you, Silent Hill instead tries to prey on the natural fears of man, namely the fear of the unknown with its dense darkness and thick fog, which really hides all the horrors that are lurking within the town of Silent Hill. You're just constantly on edge as you're making your way through the game. And the fact that all this just kind of comes out of nowhere with no real explanation as to why it's here, it really does feel like you've just dropped straight into a nightmare. That being said, while I feel like Silent Hill is really good in its opening hours, as it gets to the end of the game, it sort of starts to fall apart. And this is mostly because Silent Hill 1 really goes into the origins of Silent Hill and why it is the way it is. And once everything is explained and you know that there's something you can do about it, it becomes significantly less scary in my opinion. But, until that happens, it is still thoroughly effective, and a part of that has to do with the presentation. Though, looking at the game, you might think it's a typical PlayStation 3D with its fidgety graphics, lanky character models, and pre-rendered graphics and all that stuff. What's neat about Silent Hill is how it leverages hardware limitations to, enhance the horror. And I'm not talking in the way people say Resident Evil did with its fixed camera angles and tank controls. I'm more referring to the use of the fog. A lot of games from this time period would hide draw distances behind fog and darkness, and Silent Hill was no different, but they actually made it a gameplay mechanic. As you're wandering through the various areas of the game, you'll have a radio which will blare static whenever an enemy is nearby. So when you hear that static, you need to run the numbers. Do I wait and try to fight it out, or do I book it and risk running towards the monster instead of away from it? It really preys upon your fear of the unknown, and that's also heightened by the setting itself. I'm sure everyone has had that moment where they've been to a place like a school, a mall, or anything like that, where you would think there would be a lot of people there, but for whatever reason it's just empty, and you get this unnerving sense of isolation from that. The setting of Silent Hill very much builds upon that. The town itself is designed to be as familiar as possible with diners, schools, libraries, and hospitals and stuff like that. But just the simple fact that it's empty can be really unnerving. And then the monsters come at you and you find blood all over the place. It's just a great atmosphere. It's one of the all-time great settings in any horror game, period. The only thing that sort of sucks is the voice acting. Now, it's not as bad as something like the first Resident Evil or Mega Man 8, but it is still pretty hokey, and I'm surprised that ended up being the case because this was Konami after all, and after the success they had with hiring voice actors for the roles in Metal Gear Solid, you'd think they would have done the same for Silent Hill, but, this was a new IP, and, they probably didn't have a lot of faith in their ragtag team of troubled employees, so make of that what you will. As far as the gameplay is concerned, once again, that's sort of where Silent Hill sort of falters. The main sticking points for me is the camera and controls. The game still uses tank controls, which, as a lot of you guys know, I'm not a big fan of. I hate how clunky they are and how unnatural they feel, and do not give me that bullshit about them heightening the mood or anything like that, making it seem like you're tripping over your own 2 feet. That is nonsense. That is not why they use tank controls. They use tank controls because Resident Evil used tank controls, and Resident Evil used tank controls because they had fixed camera angles and pre-rendered backgrounds. And guess what Silent Hill does not have? It does not have fixed camera angles, and it does not have pre-rendered graphics. This game uses real-time 3D graphics, and it also has a more dynamic camera. So while there are times where it is fixed, and in those moments the tank controls do work just fine because that's what they were designed for, when you're out in the open you actually have the option to adjust your camera, and it just feels even more clunky because of how awkward it is to just swing it around or get it to point in the direction you want it to look at. I really get tired of people who feel like a game cannot be a survival horror game unless it has these features. Something like Silent Hill and even the Resident Evil series are good despite its tank controls and fixed camera angles, not because of them. All that being said, it is still a pretty effective survival horror game. You do have to be mindful of your health and ammo. Melee combat is also an option here, but, some enemies are best kept at a distance, so it's not always best to try to melee everything. You think you can melee the little small fry in the school, but then you get to the first boss fight and you're like, oh nope, not going to try to fight it that way. One thing I do really like about Silent Hill is that it does have an infinite inventory as opposed to Resident Evil's finite storage space. But at the same time, it can make it just a little too easy to stockpile resources. I feel like having some way to limit it would have been best. Or they could have tweaked it a little bit. Like the recent Silent Hill 2 remake showed that the infinite storage space can still work just fine and get that survival horror gameplay down. But no, I kind of prefer a limited storage space in a game like this. I feel like it just heightens the mood a little bit more. Speaking of sequels, Silent Hill was, of course, a really big hit. In fact, it exceeded Konami's highest expectations. And this is where studio heads and producers get really high on the success and get more hands-on in the development process in order to make sure that lightning strikes twice. But that is not what they did here. Instead, they just threw a ton of money and resources at Team Silent and told them, do it again. It was a rare instance where, you had a passionate team of developers who believed in what they were working on, the support of a major studio, and as much resources as they needed to make the game that they wanted to. And that resulted in one of the best video games of all time, and that is Silent Hill 2. Though I have always been very vocal of my issues with Silent Hill 2, to me this is a game that is successful because of its story, its presentation, its thematic content. It is not very good as far as gameplay goes, but all that stuff is just so good that it doesn't matter that the gameplay in itself is just kind of bland. Unfortunately, after Silent Hill 2, which was an even bigger success than the first Silent Hill game, that is when Konami got stupid with production. So for the next game in the series, they decided to split the development team down the center and have them make 2 games at once so that they could try and make Silent Hill a yearly franchise. And to say it didn't really work out would be an understatement. Now, to the game's credit, the next couple of games aren't that bad. Silent Hill 3 was actually a pretty good game, but a lot of people were disappointed that it moved away from the personal horror that Silent Hill 2 established in favor of the occult horror that Silent Hill was going for. And even though they tried to work in some personal horror for the main character, it wasn't anywhere near as strong, and a lot of people tend to forget about it as a result. The same can be said for Silent Hill: The Room, which does something completely different and off the wall with its gameplay. But a lot of people didn't like it, and a lot of people say this is where the series went downhill. And yeah, they're kind of right, because after Team Silent failed with Silent Hill 3 and Silent Hill 4, the team was disbanded and the franchise was handed off to smaller developers, Western developers, who made just a bunch of rubbish action horror games, and it all culminated with Silent Hill Downpour, which was one of the lowest rated games of its day. Though I've actually heard that some of these games are starting to develop something of a cult following. I haven't played all of them at this point. I think the last one I played was Silent Hill Homecoming, which I didn't have terribly high positive things to say about. But some people I talked to say that there is something to admire about Silent Hill Downpour, so yeah, maybe I'll get to that soon. And I also really need to play Shattered Memories. I hear that one's really good. So after Downpour, the series would disappear for a while, but it would finally come back with Silent Hill 2, the remake. And though a lot of people questioned whether or not it was necessary, it was 100% necessary. Silent Hill 2 was in need of a remake. The series needed a new shot at life, and biggest tragedy of all, Silent Hill 2 and Silent Hill 3 are lost media. So yeah, this remake was 100% a requirement, and it was really damn good. Like it came very close to being my favorite game of last year, and I'm really looking forward to revisiting it for Halloween this year. I also thought it was a good choice to do a remake of Silent Hill 2 because by starting with it, you could reposition the series to focus on the personal horror that was so popular in Silent Hill 2. But unfortunately, as I am recording this, a remake of the first Silent Hill has been announced. And while that is definitely necessary, I don't think it's the right time for that. I feel like what would have been smarter is if they had focused on that other new Silent Hill game that they have coming out. Do another personal horror style horror game, and then maybe see if you can work that personal horror into Silent Hill 1 in a manner that still maintains all the stuff that, about the town and everything. I just don't think a remake of the first Silent Hill is really necessary. And there are a lot of people who disagree with me, and I get that. I know there are people who do not like Silent Hill 2 and think it's so overrated. But I just think Silent Hill 2 works better. So I want more of the personal horror. I don't want to go back to the occult horror because I want every game to be unique. I want every game to be different. I don't want it to be this uniform horror series that the Western developed games ended up being, where they would just throw in stuff because it was iconic to the franchise rather than doing something original like Silent Hill 2 and Silent Hill 3 were doing. But, that's just my own personal taste. And I'm still going to play the Silent Hill 1 remake anyway because, again, it is necessary. I just don't think now is the right time for it. But regardless, the first Silent Hill on PlayStation is worth playing. Silent Hill 2, Silent Hill 3, Silent Hill 4... I would also say are worth playing, but if you can only play one Silent Hill game, I would recommend the Silent Hill 2 remake above all else, because if you need to see what Silent Hill is, that's the game you need to check out. But that's going to do it for the Silent Hill series, guys, and I hope you join me tomorrow as we continue on with the PlayStation Retrospect.